My father squeezed my hand at the airport knowing it was the last time he'd see me free. I was 15 years old thinking I was going on vacation to another country. But in reality, I was being sold as a wife to a stranger. And this didn't happen in some distant past. It happened to me, and it could be happening to someone right now as you watch this video. My name is Zana Muhsen. I grew up in Birmingham, England during the 1980s. My life was ordinary. School, friends, loud music on the radio, and a mother who did everything she could to raise me and my sister, Nadia, with dignity. Her name was Miriam. She was strong, kind, and never let us feel absence of our father, because he had disappeared. We almost never talked about him. A Yemen-born man, quiet, full of silences. When we were still young, he and my mother separated, and after that his name became a distant echo inside our house. Until one day, he reappeared. He brought gifts, stories about his culture, and an invitation that seems harmless. I want my daughters to know their roots. Nadia was 13, I was 15. Summer break, a new country, a different culture. For two British teenagers, it sounded like an adventure. My mother hesitated. Promised it would be just a short trip, a few weeks with relatives to broaden our horizons. No signs of danger, no clue that a trap had already been set. The day before the trip, we packed our bags with light clothes and comfortable sneakers. We took magazines, lip gloss, and full of dreams. The flight left London on a grey morning. I remember looking out the plane window thinking it was our first time leaving England. In a way, it felt like the beginning of our own story. But we had no idea it would be the end of freedom. During the flight, he was attentive. He told stories, explained some Yemeni customs. Everything felt like a part of a carefully planned act to keep us calm and trusting. When the plane began descending over the arid mountains of Sana'a, I felt a chill in my stomach. But I blamed the heat, the unknown. I didn't yet realize the feeling was something else. Instinct, trying to scream. As soon as we stepped into the airport, everything felt wrong. The language, the stairs, the chaos. But what terrified me most was what he did next. He handed us over to two men, saying they were cousins. He smiled, said goodbye, and vanished. No tears, no explanation, no promise to see us again. Right then, everything started to fall apart. But we didn't know it yet. They put us in an old car, no air conditioning, the windows stuck shut, and the silence inside made the air even heavier. No one explained anything. The heat felt like punishment, sticky, suffocating, clinging to the skin. We drove for hours on dusty, dirty roads, through dry mountains and villages that looked like frozen in time. With every kilometer, my heart sank deeper. My father never called. No message, no excuse. When we finally arrived, it looked like a scene from an old movie. Mud houses, barefoot children, women covered head to toe who looked away when he passed. People watched us as if we were a problem, or worse, a new possession that had just arrived. Nadia and I were exhausted, sweating, confused, but no one seemed concerned. They put us in a small, dark house that smelled of dust and strong tea and said, "Rest. Tomorrow is an important day." That night, I hardly slept. The ceiling fan was just a wire hanging from the roof that didn't even work. The cracked walls let in sounds from outside. Footsteps, voices in Arabic, slamming doors. I didn't understand a word, but I understood the tone. Urgency or preparation. In the morning, a woman woke me up. She barely looked at me. She handed me a long, dark cloth and told me to put it on. When I asked why, she answered dryly, "You're getting married." I didn't believe it. Thought I had misunderstood. I got dressed, but left nervously, expecting someone to explain the joke. But no one left. No one explained anything. The woman in the house just looked down, as if they already knew there was nothing to be done, as if they were silently telling me, "We've been where you are." I tried to ask, I tried to protest, but nothing worked. In that house, my voice already had no value. And it was one of them, an older woman, who finally told me the first raw truth. "You're not here on a visit. You were sold." It felt like the ground vanished beneath my feet. The heat no longer came from the sun, it came from inside like a fever of panic. There was no escape, and the name of the man I was marrying I would only learn hours later. His name was Abdullah, an older man, silent, with a face hardened by the sun and hands marked by years of working in the land. When I first saw him, he stood quietly at the door, watching me, like someone inspecting an object before taking it home. Still trying to make sense of it, still clinging to the hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But the ceremony happened. No flowers, no music, no willing witnesses. I wore borrowed clothes, my face hidden behind a veil that concealed my confusion and my rage. No one said my name. No one asked me anything. They spoke for me, about me, as if I didn't exist. In that moment, I realized my body had been exchanged through agreements I was never part of. To that family, I was no longer a person. I was property, a wife acquired with my own father's consent. Nadia, my sister, was living something similar, in another house with another man, also sold, also silenced. Sometimes we tried to see each other, but it was difficult. Each one isolated, each one watched, and both fully aware that we were in a place where no one, absolutely no one, was coming to save us. The women in the house looked at me with pity, but it was a silent kind of pity, as if they had already learned, in the hard way, that pain here is part of their routine, that struggling only make it worse, and the best way to survive is to stay silent. In the days that followed, I was taken to the house where I would live with Abdullah. It was a structure made of mud and wood, with a dirt floor and a thin mattress on wooden stalls. No electricity, no privacy, just the certainty that from that moment on, I was alone. Abdullah barely spoke, and when he did, it was in dry commands. He never asked me what I wanted, never cared how I felt, and he didn't need to raise a hand for fear to take over me. His eyes did that on their own. That first night, lying in a place I didn't know, with my heart racing and my soul shattered, I understood. My father hadn't just abandoned me. He had sold me, like someone handing over an animal, like someone trading one thing for another, like someone who was never a father at all. That first night, sleep never came, and it never came the same way again. The straw mattress itched, the wooden ceiling cracked, but the worst pain wasn't from the house. It was the silence that began growing inside me. A silence that smothered my voice, my dreams, even the memory of who I was. The days became tasks. They woke me before the sun rose, often by shouting or yanking my arm. They forced me to carry heavy buckets of water for miles under a merciless sun. I washed clothes and stones, cared for animals, swept dirty floors. All under the watchful eyes of older village women, who seemed to watch me not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear that I might try to escape, fear that I'd be punished for seeking freedom. I didn't understand the language, I couldn't write, I had no paper, no pencil, no voice. It felt like I'd been buried alive, and now I was expected to smile at those shoveling dirt over me. As the weeks passed, my body began to obey out of habit, but my mind refused. Inside, something still resisted, something still screamed, even if no one heard. I tried to escape. The first time was at night, with just an old cloth over my shoulders and bare feet. I walked in the darkness until my heels bled, but I was found by a man on the road, who returned me like a lost animal. The second time I was beaten so badly I couldn't stand for days. They said I was property, that even as a woman I was possession, and that any possession that tries to run must be broken. That's when fear stopped being a feeling, it became a permanent condition. It was in everything, in the food, in Abdallah's eyes, in the sound of the door locking at night. A fear that moved into me as if it were part of my body. And I began to disappear. I went so long without hearing my own voice that I began to forget it. In the rare moments I was alone, I would whisper my full name, the name of my street back in Birmingham, the smell of my mother's cooking, like a secret ritual, just to keep me from going insane. Because there, in that dry and scorching land, I was no longer Zana. I was only his woman. It was in that state of absence from myself, from my language, my history, that I discovered I was pregnant. I was 16, expecting a child from a man I never chose, in a house I never wanted, in a country that had swallowed me whole without ceremony. The news hit me like a punch. I felt anger, disgust, fear, and a kind of sorrow that has no name. Time passed slowly until the birth. I had no prenatal care, no rest. I worked until the last day, treated as I had always been there, like an object. When my son was born, they left me in a corner alone with a coarse cloth and let me body handle it all in its own. There was no celebration, no congratulations, only the weight of another responsibility dumped on me. And when I looked at that baby, small, defenseless, with warm skin and eyes still shut, something inside me broke again. How could I love something born of such trauma? How could I protect a child in a place where even I had no right to exist? His name was Abdul, and even though everything screamed that he was the result of violence, he was also a part of me. Holding him in my arms, I realized there were more than chains around me now. They were roots, because escaping with your own body was already hard enough. But escaping with another human being in your arms was nearly impossible. Raising Abdul was a second prison. I couldn't make any decisions about his life. I couldn't take him with me, couldn't register his in my name, couldn't even call him mine out loud. The father's family decided everything. What he ate, where he slept, how he dressed. I only cared for him, only obeyed. And each time he cried, my heart shattered a bit more, because even my embrace wasn't fully mine. Still, I did everything I could to protect him. I hid food when there wasn't enough. I covered him with my own body during cold nights. I whispered songs in English, even knowing he couldn't understand. It was the only way to keep myself alive inside. But with the love came the fear. Fear that they'd take him from me. Fear that they'd hurt him. Fear that he'd grow up thinking this was normal, that a woman exists only to obey, stay silent, and give birth. And it was for him that I began to plan the unthinkable, to ask for help. Without knowing how, even knowing that if they found out, it would be the end of me. The idea was born in silence, and it was in silence that I began to feed it every day. There was no paper, no pen, no one I could trust. But there was one thing they hadn't been able to take from me: the memory that another world existed. Our world with telephones, newspapers, mail, people who listened. And even it felt distant like a faded dream, I knew it was still out there. And somehow I had to reach it. I spent months observing everything. Who came in, who left, who seemed less hostile. What was left unlocked, which eyes at the very least still looked human. Then one day a different man appeared, a foreign. He looked like a technician, maybe part of a humanitarian project. He spoke a bit of English, and most striking of all, he looked me in the eyes without disgust, not like property, but like a person. It was a brief look, but it was enough. I decided to try. I waited days to be sure, and when we returned to the village, I seized a moment he was alone and whispered, "Please help me." He turned pale, said nothing, just looked at me like he had seen a ghost, then left. I thought I had ruined everything, that he would report me, that someone would punish me. But the next day he came back. Silently, he slipped something from his sleeve into my hand, a tiny piece of paper folded the size of a coin and a short stump of pencil, the kind used for marking walls. It was almost nothing, but to me, it was a miracle. That night, hiding behind a mud wall, with my heart racing and my hands trembling, I wrote the most important letter of my life. I wrote where I was, with whom, what they had done to me. I begged for help. I pleaded. "Mom, get me out of here. I'm alive, but trapped." I folded the paper like it was a sacred secret and gave it back the next day. He didn't promise anything. He just took it, and with it, he took my last hope. Time became my enemy. Days, weeks, months. No reply, no change. Sometimes I thought he had gotten scared and thrown it away, or that someone had found it and destroyed it. I even started to doubt whether I had really written the letter, or if it had just been the last hallucination of someone trying not to go mad. Then, one day, rumors began to spread, whispers in houses, casual comments at markets. People say there were foreign journalists in the capital asking about two missing British girls. It was just a phrase in the distance, overheard by chance. But to me, it sounded like thunder. It was the first crack in the wall, the first proof that somewhere in the world someone had heard my scream. While I was still there, buried in dust, trapped in a body that no longer obeyed me, reduced to silence and chores, my mother Miriam was at war, and I had no idea. When the letter finally reached her hands, years after I had disappeared, she didn't cry. She ignited. She held that dear trembling piece of paper as if it were proof of life. Because it was the confirmation that her daughter was alive and being held captive by the man who once called himself her father. She didn't waste a second. She took the letters to journalists, knocked on the doors of the British government, wrote to MPs, diplomats, human rights organizations. Where people said it was impossible, she insisted. Where they said nothing could be done, she found a way. She made the name Zana Muhsen appear in headlines, report protests. She turned mourning into a movement, and her voice became a lighthouse for everything I could no longer say. The pressure increased. The case exploded in the UK. And, as slow and tangled as diplomatic negotiations were, something began to move. But in Yemen, none of that was clear. There, women whispered, men grew suspicious, and I continued living like a shadow. It was only much later that someone called me aside and said, with barely any expression, "Your name is being searched." That day, my knees gave out, because after years of being buried alive, someone, somewhere in the world, had dug deep enough to reach me. And that someone was my mother. The next piece of news hit like a knife. To live, I would have to abandon my son. The Yemeni government didn't recognize my legal right over Abdul, even though I was his mother, even though I had raised him, even with everything I'd lost. The pain of that condition tore me apart from the inside. How could I accept that? How could I sign my freedom while also signing my surrender? How do I explain to a 7-year-old boy that his mother won't be there anymore? Not because she chose to leave, but because the world decided so? Still, my mother insisted. She knew that if I died there, he would lose everything. And maybe this was the only chance to one day return for him. Alive, whole, and with a voice. So she fought until the very last second. And because of her, the impossible finally broke open. I would be rescued, but with a piece of my heart torn out. The day began like any other, the same dust on the ground, the same smell of smoke in the air, the same invisible tension living in every corner of that house. But something inside me sensed that something was different. It was as if the silence was preparing the ground for a farewell. Hours later, 2 men arrived, accompanied by a local police officer. One of them was British. I could tell by the way he walked, his clothes too clean for that place, and the accent when he pronounced my name. Zana Muhsen. It was as if my name had been given back to me, not as a possession, not as a number, but as an identity, as someone who still existed. They spoke quickly. They explained that the Yemen government had authorized my release under international pressure, that my mother was alive, that the letter had reached her, and that everything, my imprisonment, my disappearance, my story, was now under the eyes of the world. I wanted to scream, to run, to cry, but I couldn't. There, any display of emotion could ruin everything. My husband's family didn't want to let me go. To them, I was property, an object, and now I was being taken away. Any sign of relief could trigger a reaction. So, I just nodded. But what destroyed me the most in that moment was what I couldn't take. My own son. Abdul was sleeping somewhere in the house, and even if he had been awake, they would never have let him near me. For the Yemeni government, he belonged to the father. End of story. No proof of love, no hug, nothing would change that. I grabbed a small bag with the only change of clothes they allowed me to take. No toys, no photos, no keepsake from Abdul, just the clothes of my back, and an emptiness that had already begun to scream before the door even closed. The road to Sonna was long. The mountains we crossed seemed to mock me. The same ones that had swallowed me for nearly a decade were now spitting me out, tearing away everything that had kept me standing. The driver tried to make conversation, but I couldn't answer. I just kept thinking, is this real? Am I really living? Or is it just a new kind of illusion? It was only when I saw the first buildings of the capital that I began to believe. After 8 years, I was living, but not whole. I would never be whole again. They took me to a government building, a small room with a clean bed, white sheets, and a bottle of cold water on the table. For anyone else, it would have been a modest shelter. For me, it felt like a palace. It was the first time in years that no one told me to be quiet, that no one touched me without permission, that no one treated me like a thing. A local woman offered me rice, chicken, and fresh bread. I sat down to eat and cried. I cried for being free, and I cried for leaving behind the one thing I loved the most, the taste of the food mixed with the taste of guilt. Every bite was a reminder. My son was still there, and I wasn't. I stayed there for a few days while the paperwork was processed. They gave me new clothes, a temporary passport, and most of all, time. Time to process what had never been processed. Accumulated fear, unlived grief, the pain of being silenced, erased, and forgotten. And now, dragged back into a world I no longer recognize. When I boarded the plane, my body was stiff. The lights of the city grew smaller beneath the window. My eyes burned, but the tears took time to fall. It was as if my soul didn't know whether to cry from relief or amputation. I was free, but without my son, without justice, without answers. The plane landed in London. It was autumn. The cold air stung my skin, but smelled like home. Rushing people, cars, horns, shop windows. It felt like another planet. My mother was waiting, and when she saw me, she ran. We hugged for minutes that felt like lifetimes. She was shaking, I was too. No words could account for 8 years of silence. But I was no longer the same, and she knew that. In the days that followed, I barely spoke. I flinched at the sound of cattle and my reflection in the mirror at the feel of a clean blanket. I spent hours on the couch staring at nothing. It was as if my body had returned, but my soul was still buried in the mountains of Yemen. I felt like a stranger in my own country. I stumbled over my English as if my tongue had aged. People wanted to hear my story but didn't know how to look at it. They listened like someone watching a distant film. But I wasn't fiction. I was a surviving body. And surviving, I learned, is not the end. It's the beginning of another kind of fight, a fight to exist again. But this time, on my terms, with my voice. If this story touched you, make sure you subscribe to this channel right now. Because here the truth isn't softened, it's told. Even when it hurts, even when it screams. For a long time, I thought my story ended at the airport when I finally came home. But the truth is, it kept living inside me every single day. In the silence, in the nightmares, in the guilt of leaving my son behind, in the pain of being forgotten by the one who was supposed to protect me. It was my mother who told me one day, "You have to tell your story, because if you don't, no one else can." It took me time, but I wrote it, word by word, as if I were pulling the pain out with my bare hands. And I published the book, sold, not to relive the trauma, but to make it sure it never happens again. Because what happened to me and to Nadia wasn't an isolated case. It's a system, disguised as culture, as tradition, as honor. After the story came out, I received letters from women around the world. Some had gone through similar things. Others said that just hearing my voice helped them finally name their own abuse. And that's when I understood. My pain could also be a cry for others. Share the story. There are still girls boarding planes with passports in hands and promises in their suitcases, not knowing they were heading straight into a prison with no bars. And sometimes a video like this is the only chance someone has to hear what no one else dares to say. In the next story, you'll uncover another truth buried by time. Another life shattered by forced choices, marked by silence, by courage, and by an impossible decision. Escape alone or die with your own children. If you thought this story was powerful, get ready. The next one may change everything you believe about justice and survival.